Chapter 13. The Stricken Messenger. After a full night's sleep, Nancy bounced out of bed filled with energy. She couldn't be sure of the route Guterman's car had taken her, but she had jotted down everything she could remember. She dialed Ned's room number and was greeted by his sleepy voice. "Come on, Ned! Get up and get dressed. Meet me right away. We've no time to lose. Today is the big day. Breakfast in 10 minutes. Half an hour later, Ned, still bleary-eyed, wandered into the hotel restaurant and slid into the seat opposite Nancy. "I can't believe it," he yawned. "You look radiant, and I look like a sack of wet laundry. How do you do it, Nancy?" Nancy waved her hand impatiently and grinned. "Now stop flattering me and be serious. Look." She pushed a map of Vienna toward him. It was cross-hatched with lines of purple, green, and red. "What is this?" Ned mumbled, taking a swig of orange juice. "It's the route to the film," Nancy said. "Which film? Our film? Captive Witness?" Yes. I saw part of it last night." Ned was completely confused. "Last night?" The girl shook her head. "I saw it with Guterman." "Guterman!" Ned exclaimed. "I wish you'd stop repeating everything I say." Nancy laughed. "Well, everything you say is so fascinating, I just can't help myself." "Let me explain," Nancy said, and told her friend the entire story of her meeting with the man. "That's really terrific," Ned said when she had finished. "I came along to protect you, and what do? Play right into the hands of that crook." "But I had to. Don't you see? If I had told you, they might have found out and canceled the whole thing. I'm sorry. Forgive me. But please hurry. I need you to rent and drive a car so we can retrace the route Guterman took me on last night." Ned looked at her ruefully for a moment, then smiled. "Okay, let's go." Once they had secured a car and were on their way, Nancy spread the map on her lap. "I think it was somewhere around here." Ned paused to follow her finger. "You realize, of course, you're pointing to half of Vienna," he said. "I know." Nancy sighed. "Well, let's start with the red line and keep our speed at 20 miles per hour. For more than 4 hours, they cruised up one street and down another with no success. At last, Nancy folded up the map and put it in the glove compartment. "I give up," she said. "Oh, don't do that," Ned replied. "But it's hopeless. I didn't see any building with a flight of 12 very low steps leading up to the front door. Shall we go back then?" Nancy nodded grimly. "Look, it isn't worth fretting over. You did better today than yesterday. At least this time we didn't get chased by a hungry Doberman." "Thanks for the consolation," Nancy said, half smiling. They returned to the hotel in time to meet Professor Bagley and their friends, who were arriving on the tour bus. The first voice they heard was that of the little bus driver. It was loud and strident, commanding the attention of everyone within a block. "Strauss! Oh yes, he was so-so. He wrote pretty music. The Blue Danube and Tales from the Vienna Woods. But what is that compared to Mozart?" Suddenly, Bess and George spotted Nancy coming toward them. "Nancy!" The cousins chimed simultaneously and raced toward her. "I see our bus driver is still at it." Nancy grinned. "All the way from Salzburg," George groaned. "Did he run off the road again?" "Not once, but many times," Bess said. "It was awful. Once he got so angry because someone compared Beethoven to Mozart that he actually stopped the bus, ran outside, and shouted into the valley, 'Beethoven is a bore! Mozart is sublime!' Over and over. The professor had to go out and drag him back into the bus." As soon as Nancy had seen Bess and George off to their rooms, She turned to Professor Bagley and the ever-present Eric Nugg. They went to a nearby sidewalk cafe, and after ordering hot chocolate and croissants with butter and jam, Nancy related her recent experiences, including the fact that Kessler would probably agree to trade himself for the 10 children. Dr. Bagley's face drained white. "We can't let that happen," he said angrily. "Kessler can't go back." "I know," Nancy said under her breath. "Have you received your final instructions regarding the time and place of the crossing?" "Not a word, but I expect to receive information today. I've been told to stay around the hotel and keep myself visible. By the way, the cat burglar struck at last." Nancy's eyes twinkled with excitement. "You mean they took the bait?" "They certainly did. Last night I left the false document in a sealed envelope at the bottom of my musette bag. I had folded the message twice and dropped a few grains of salt in the middle of it. This morning I opened the envelope and the salt was gone." Someone did an excellent job of unsealing the envelope, reading the contents and resealing it perfectly, but didn't notice the salt. "Well, I must say that was a bit more subtle than the business at Munich airport," Nancy remarked. "Of course, I suppose if the theft had worked there, you probably would have found the bag later, thrown away somewhere, with certain things missing but the envelope left intact just to make it look like a regular robbery." "Good deduction, but that would have been equally clumsy of them. Anyway, now that they have the information, all we have to do is wait for our contact to surface with the correct details." Ned, who had gone to his room, returned shortly to join them, engaging in banter with Eric as they vied for Nancy's attention. Dr. Bagley watched in amusement, wearing his owl look. Suddenly, Nancy heard a man's voice coming from the table directly behind the professor. "Don't turn around, Dr. Bagley," he said softly but urgently. "Pretend I'm not here. I am your contact. Listen carefully. We are now free to tell you where you will find the true instructions regarding the rendezvous with the children. Look." The voice stopped, choking in a half-strangled sound. Nancy whirled out of her chair to see the man fall in the throes of a heart seizure. She took the initiative, helping Ned and the professor roll the man on his back and loosen his clothes. Leaning on her extensive training in first aid and paramedic techniques, she took his pulse and bent to listen for his heartbeat. "I don't hear anything," she cried. Quickly, she assumed the correct position for mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, while Ned, who had assisted Nancy in similar emergencies, administered chest pounding. In seconds, the man was breathing again, and his heart began to beat. "Keep him warm," Nancy ordered, as some hotel employees appeared with a blanket. "I hope that someone has called an ambulance." Indeed, someone had, and as they waited for its arrival, the victim began to regain consciousness, though he was paralyzed on the left side of his body. He tried to speak but could make only indistinct gurgling sounds. Nancy tried to quiet him, but his eyes rolled wildly toward Eric Nugg. "What's he trying to tell us?" Dr. Bagley said anxiously. But the man's words were so garbled, neither Nancy, Ned, Eric, nor the professor could decipher them. "It's a shame," Nancy said, as the ambulance came. The man tried to raise himself, pointing at Eric before falling back on the stretcher, exhausted. "I know he's trying to tell us something about Eric, but what?" the girl muttered. "I have no idea," Dr. Bagley whispered back. "But it's impossible to discuss secret business with 50 people gaping over our shoulders." "Someone ought to stay with him every single minute until he's able to communicate," Nancy remarked. "I agree, but I don't think—" the professor started to say as the doctor in charge interrupted the conversation. He complimented Nancy and her friends for saving the man's life, while attendants carefully placed the patient in the ambulance. "Thank you," Nancy said. "I'm his niece, and I would like to accompany him if I may." Ned gasped, and the professor looked up, somewhat less startled. "I'll call you from the hospital," the young detective told her companions as the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle moved off. What no one had noticed, however, was the small black car that had pulled away from the curb and followed the ambulance. In the front seat, with evil grins on their faces, were Herr Guterman and Herr Berger. End of chapter 13.